and those of my mind, which are droller still. I may torment myself to attain the highest sublime of the lunatic asylum, nothing comes of it. Will he laugh, or will he not? That is what I am obliged to keep saying to myself in the midst of my contortions, and you may judge how damaging this uncertainty is to one's talent. My hypochondriac, with his head buried in a nightcap that covers his eyes, has the air of an immovable pagode, with a string tied to its chin, and going down under his chair. You wait for the string to be pulled, and it is not pulled, or if by chance the jaws open, it is only to articulate some word that shows he has not seen you, and that all your drolleries have been thrown away. This word is the answer to some question which you put to him 4 days before. The word spoken, the mastoid muscle contracts, and the jaw sticks. Then he set himself to imitate his man. He placed himself on a chair, his head fixed, his hat coming over his eyebrows, his eyes half shut, his arms hanging down, moving his jaw up and down like an automaton, happy, smiley, gloomy, obscure, oracular as destiny itself. Such is our patron. At the other side of the room is a prude who plays at importance, to whom one could bring one's self to say that she is pretty, because she is pretty, though she has a blemish or two upon her face. Item. She is more spiteful, more conceited, and more silly than a goose. Item. She insists on having wit. Item. You have to persuade her that you believe she has more of it than anybody else in the world. Item. She knows nothing, and she has a turn for settling everything out of hand. Item. You must applaud her decisions with feet and hands, jump for joy, and scream with admiration. How fine that is, how delicate, well said, subtly seen, singularly felt. Where do women get that? Without study, by mere force of instinct, and pure light of nature. That is really like a miracle. And then they want us to believe that experience, study, reflection, education, have anything to do with the matter, and other fooleries to match, and tears of joy, 10 times a day to kneel down, one knee bent in front of the other leg drawn back, the arms extended towards the goddess, to seek one's desire in her eyes, to hang on her lips, to wait for her command, and then start off like a flash of lightning. Where is the man who would subject himself to play such a part, if it is not the wretch, who finds there 2 or 3 times a week the wherewithal to still the tribulation of his inner parts? I should never have thought you were so fastidious. I am not. In the beginning I watched the others, and I did as they did, even rather better, because I am more frankly impudent, a better comedian, hungrier, and better off for lungs. I descend apparently in a direct line from the famous Stentor. And to give me a just idea of the force of his organ, he set off laughing, with violence enough to break the windows of the coffee-house, and to interrupt the chess-players. But what is the good of this talent? You cannot guess. No, I am rather slow. Suppose the debate opened, and victory uncertain, I get up, and, displaying my thunder, I say, that is as Mademoiselle asserts. That is worth calling a judgment. There is genius in the expression. But one must not always approve in the same manner, one would be monotonous, and seem insincere, and become insipid. You only escape that by judgment and resource. You must know how to prepare and place your major and most peremptory tones, to seize the occasion and the moment. When, for instance, there is a difference in feeling, and the debate has risen to its last degree of violence, and you have ceased to listen to one another, and all speak at the same time, you ought to have your place at the corner of the room which is farthest removed from the field of battle, to have prepared the way for your explosion by a long silence, and then suddenly to fall like a thunderclap over the very midst of the combatants. Nobody possesses this art as I do. But where I am truly surprising is in the opposite way. I have low tones that I accompany with a smile, and an infinite variety of approving tricks of face, nose, lips, brow, eyes, all make play. I have a suppleness of reins, a manner of twisting the spine, of shrugging the shoulders, extending the fingers, inclining the head, closing the eyes, and throwing myself into a state of stupefaction, as if I had heard a divine angelic voice come down from heaven. That is what flatters. I do not know whether you seize rightly all the energy of that last attitude. I did not invent it, but nobody has ever surpassed me in its execution. Behold, behold. Truly, it is unique. Think you there is a woman's brain that could stand that? It must be admitted that you have carried the talent of playing the madman, and of self-debasement, as far as it can possibly be carried. Try as hard as they will never touch me, not the best of them. Polisset, for instance, will never be more than a good learner. But if this part is amusing at first, and if you have some relish in inwardly mocking at the folly of the people whom you are intoxicating, in the long run that ceases to be exciting, and then after a certain number of discoveries one is obliged to repeat one's self. Wit and art have their limits. 'Tis only God Almighty and some rare geniuses, for whom the career widens as they advance. With this precious enthusiasm for fine things, and this facility of genius of yours, is it possible that you have invented nothing? Pardon me, for instance, that admiring attitude of the back, of which I spoke to you, I regard it as my own, though envy may contest my claim. I dare say it has been employed before, but who has felt how convenient it was for laughing in one's sleeve at the ass for whom one was dying of admiration? I have more than 100 ways of opening fire on a girl under the very eyes of her mother, without the latter suspecting a jot of it, yes, and even of making her an accomplice. I had hardly begun my career before I disdained all the vulgar fashions of slipping a billet douse. I have 10 ways of having them taken from me, and out of the number I venture to flatter myself there are some that are new. I possess in an especial degree the gift of encouraging a timid young man. I have secured success for some who had neither wit nor good looks. If all that was written down, I fancy people would concede me some genius. And would do you singular honor. I don't doubt it. In your place, I would put those famous methods on paper. It would be a pity for them to be lost. It is true, but you could never suppose how little I think of method and precepts. He who needs a protocol will never go far. Your genius reads little, experiments much, and teaches himself. Look at Caesar, Turenne, Vauban, the Marquise de Tencin, her brother the Cardinal, and the Cardinal's secretary, the Abbé Troublet, and Bae. Who is it that has given lessons to Bae? Nobody. 'Tis nature that forms these rare men. Well, but you might do this in your lost hours, when the anguish of your empty stomach, or the weariness of your stomach overloaded, banishes slumber. I'll think of it. It is better to write great things than to execute small ones. Then the soul rises on wings, the imagination is kindled, whereas it shrivels in amazement at the applause which the absurd public lavishes so perversely on that mincing creature of a Dangeville, who plays so flatly, who walks the stage nearly bent double, who stares affectedly and incessantly into the eyes of every one she talks to, and who takes her grimaces for finesse, and her little strut for grace, or on that emphatic clarion, who becomes more studied, more pretentious, more elaborately heavy, than I can tell you. That imbecile of a Pitt claps hands to the echo, and never sees that we are a mere worsted ball of daintinesses. 'Tis true the ball grows a trifle big, but what does it matter, that we have the finest skin, the finest eyes, the prettiest bill, little feeling inside, in truth, a step that is not exactly light, but which for all that is not as awkward as they say. As for sentiment, on the other hand, there is not one of these stage dames whom we cannot cap. What do you mean by all that? Is it irony or truth? The worst of it is that this deuced sentiment is all internal, and not a glimpse of it appears outside, but I who am now talking to you, I know, and know well, that she has it. If it is not that, you should see, if a fit of ill humor comes on, how we treat the valets, how the waiting maids are cuffed and trounced, what kicks await our good friend, if he fails in an atom of that respect which is our due. 'Tis a little demon, I tell you, full of sentiment and dignity. You don't quite know where you are, eh? I confess I can hardly make out whether you are speaking in good faith or in malice. I am a plain man. Be kind enough to be a little more outspoken, and to leave your art behind for once. What is it? Why, it is what we retail before our little patroness about the Dangeville or the Clarion, mixed up here and there with a word or two to put you on the scent. I will allow you to take me for a good for nothing, but not for a fool, and 'tis only a fool, or a man eaten up with conceit, who could say such a parcel of impertinences seriously. But how do people ever bring themselves to say them? It is not done all at once, but little by little you come to it. Ingenii largita venter. Then hunger must press you very hard. That may be, yet strong as you may think them, be sure that those to whom they are addressed are much more accustomed to listen to them than we are to hazard them. Is there anybody who has courage to be of your opinion? What do you mean by anybody? It is the sentiment and language of the whole of society. Those of you who are not great rascals must be great fools. Fools. I assure you there is only one, and that is he who feasts us to cheat him. But how can people allow themselves to be cheated in such gross fashion? For surely the superiority of the Dangeville and the Claren is a settled thing. We swallow until we are full to the throat any lie that flatters us, and take drop by drop a truth that is bitter to us. And then we have the air of being so profoundly penetrated, so true. Yet you must once, at any rate, have sinned against the principles of art, and let slip, by an oversight, some of those bitter truths that wound, for, in spite of the wretched, abject, vile, abominable part you play, I believe you have at bottom some delicacy of soul. Not the least in the world. Deuce take me if I know what I am. In a general way, I have a mind as round as a ball, and a character fresh as a water willow. Never false, little interest as I have in being true, never true, little interest as I have in being false. I say things just as they come into my head, sensible things, then so much the better, impertinent things, then people take no notice. I let my natural frankness have full play. I never in all my life gave a thought, either beforehand, what to say, or while I was saying it, or after I had said it. And so I offend nobody. Still that did happen with the worthy people among whom you used to live, and who were so kind to you. What would you have? It is a mishap, an unlucky moment, such as there always are in life. There is no such thing as unbroken bliss. I was too well off, it could not last. We have, as you know, the most numerous and the best chosen company. It is a school of humanity, the renewal of hospitality after the antique. All the poets who fall, we pick them up, all decried musicians, all the authors who are never read, all the actresses who are hissed, a parcel of beggarly, disgraced, stupid, parasitical souls, and at the head of them all I have the honor of being the brave chief of a timorous flock. It is I who exhort them to eat the first time they come, and I who ask for drink for them, they are so shy. A few young men in rags who do not know where to lay their heads, but who have good looks, a few scoundrels who bamboozle the master of the house, and put him to sleep, for the sake of gleaning after him in the fields of the mistress of the house. We seem gay, but at bottom we are devoured by spleen and a raging appetite. Wolves are not more famishing, nor tigers more cruel. Like wolves when the ground has been long covered with snow, we raven over our food, and whatever succeeds we rend like tigers. Never was seen such a collection of soured, malignant, venomous beasts. You hear nothing but the names of Buffon, Duclos, Montesquieu, Rousseau, Voltaire, D'Alembert, Diderot, and God knows the epithets that bear them company. Nobody can have any parts if he is not as stupid as ourselves. That is the plan on which Pellicet's play of the philosophers has been conceived. And you are not spared in it, any more than your neighbors. So much the better. Perhaps they do me more honor than I deserve. I should be humiliated if those who speak ill of so many clever and worthy people took it into their heads to speak well of me. Everybody must pay his scot. After sacrificing the greater animals, then we immolate the others. Insulting science and virtue for a living, that is dearly earned bread. I have already told you, we are without any consistency, we insult all the world, and afflict nobody. We have sometimes the heavy Abbé d'Olivet, the big Abbé Leblanc, the hypocrite Bateau. The big Abbé is only spiteful before he has had his dinner, his coffee taken, he throws himself into an armchair, his feet against the ledge of the fireplace, and sleeps like an old parrot on its perch. If the noise becomes violent he yawns, stretches his arms, rubs his eyes, and says, "Well, well, what is it?" It is whether Pyrrhon has more wit than Voltaire. Let us understand, is it wit that you are talking about, or is it taste? For as to taste, your Pyrrhon has not a suspicion of it. Not a suspicion of it. No, and there we are, embarked in a dissertation upon taste. Then the patron makes a sign with his hand for people to listen to him, for if he piques himself upon one thing more than another, it is taste. Taste, he says, taste is a thing. But, on my soul, I don't know what thing he said that it was, nor does he. Then sometimes we have friend Rob. He regales us with his equivocal stories, with the miracles of the convulsionaries which he has seen with his own eyes, and with some cantos of a poem on a subject that he knows thoroughly. His verses I detest, but I love to hear him recite them. He has the air of an energumen. They all cry out around him, "There is a poet worth calling a poet." Then there comes to us also a certain noodle with a dull and stupid air, but who has the keenness of a demon, and is more mischievous than an old monkey. He is one of those figures that provoke pleasantries and sarcasms, and that God made for the chastisement of those who judge by appearances, and who ought to have learnt from the mirror that it is as easy to be a wit with the air of a fool as to hide a fool under the air of a wit. 'Tis a very common piece of cowardice to immolate a good man to the amusement of the others. People never fail to turn to this man, he is a snare that we set for the newcomers, and I have scarcely known one of them who was not caught. I was sometimes amazed at the justice of my madman's observations on men and characters, and I showed him my surprise. That is, he answered, because one derives good out of bad company, as one does out of libertinism. You are recompensed for the loss of your innocence by that of your prejudices, in the society of the bad. Where vice shows itself without a mask, you learn to understand them. And then I have read a little. What have you read? I have read, and I read, and I read over and over again Theophrastus and La Bruyère and Molière. Excellent works, all of them. they are far better than people suppose, but who is there who knows how to read them? Everybody does, according to the measure of his intelligence. No, hardly anybody. Could you tell me what people look for in them? Amusement and instruction. But what instruction, for that is the point. The knowledge of one's duties, the love of virtue, the hatred of vice. For my part, I gather from them all that one ought to do, and all that one ought not to say. Thus, when I read the Ave, I say to myself, be a miser if thou wilt, but beware of talking like the miser. When I read Tartuffe, I say, be a hypocrite if thou wilt, but do not talk like a hypocrite. Keep the vices that are useful to thee, but avoid their tone and the appearances that would make thee laughable. To preserve thyself from such a tone and such appearances, it is necessary to know what they are. Now these authors have drawn excellent pictures of them. I am myself, and I remain what I am, but I act and I speak as becomes the character. I am not one of those who despise moralists. There is a great deal of profit to be got from them, especially with those who have applied morality to action. Vice only hurts men from time to time, the characteristics of vice hurt them from morning to night. Perhaps it would be better to be insolent than to have an insolent expression. One who is insolent in character only insults people now and again. One who is insolent in expression insults them incessantly. And do not imagine that I am the only reader of my kind. I have no other merit in this respect than having done on system, from a natural integrity of understanding, and with true and reasonable vision, what most others do by instinct. And so their readings make them no better than I am, and they remain ridiculous in spite of themselves, while I am only so when I choose, and always leave them a vast distance behind me, for the same art which teaches me how to escape ridicule on certain occasions teaches me also on certain others how to incur it happily. Then I recall to myself all that the others said, and all that I read, and I add all that issues from my own originality, which is in this kind wondrous fertile. You have done well to reveal these mysteries to me, for otherwise I should have thought you self-contradictory. I am not so in the least. For against a single time when one has to avoid ridicule, happily there are 100 when one has to provoke it. There is no better part among the great people than that of fool. For a long time there was the king's fool, at no time was there ever the king's sage, officially so styled. Now I am the fool of Burton and many others. Perhaps yours at the present moment, or perhaps you are mine. A man who meant to be a sage would have no fool, so he who has a fool is no sage. If he is not a sage he is a fool, and perhaps, even were he the king himself, the fool of his fool. For the rest, remember that in a matter so variable as manners, there is nothing absolutely, essentially, and universally true or false, if not that one must be what interest would have us be, good or bad, wise or mad, decent or ridiculous, honest or vicious. If virtue had happened to be the way to fortune, then I should either have been virtuous, or I should have pretended virtue, like other persons. As it was, they wanted me to be ridiculous, and I made myself so. As for being vicious, nature alone had taken all the trouble that was needed in that. When I use the term vicious, it is for the sake of talking your language, for, if we came to explanations, it might happen that you called vice what I call virtue, and virtue what I call vice. Then we have the authors of the opera comique, their actors and their actresses, and oftener still their managers, all people of resource and superior merit. And I forget the whole clique of scribblers in the gazettes, the avant-coureurs, the petites affiches, the amis littéraires, the observateurs littéraires. The amis littéraires, the observateurs littéraires. But they detest one another. Quite true, but all beggars are reconciled at the porringer. That cursed observateur littéraire, I wish the devil had had both him and his sheet. It was that dog of a miserly priest who caused my disaster. He appeared on our horizon for the first time. He arrived at the hour that drives us all out of our dens, the hour for dinner. When it is bad weather, lucky the man among us who has a shilling in his pocket to pay for a hackney coach. He is free to laugh at a comrade for coming besplashed up to his eyes and wet to the skin, though at night he goes to his own home in just the same plight. There was one of them some months ago who had a violent brawl with the Savoyard at the door. They had a running account, the creditor insisted on being paid, and the debtor was not in funds, and yet he could not go upstairs without passing through the hands of the other. Dinner is served, they do the honors of the table to the abbé, they place him at the upper end. I come in and see this. What, abbé, you preside? That is all very well for today, but tomorrow you will come down, if you please, by one plate, the day after by another plate, and so on from plate to plate, now to right and now to left, until from the place that I occupied one time before you, Frieren once after me, Diderot once after Frieren, Polisset once after Diderot, you become stationary beside me, poor rascal as you are, chasaido sempre cum, an Italian proverb not to be decently reproduced. The abbé, who is a good fellow, and takes everything in good part, bursts out laughing. Mademoiselle, struck by my observation and by the aptness of my comparison, bursts out laughing. Everybody to right and left burst out laughing, except the master of the house, who flies into a huff, and uses language that would have meant nothing if we had been by ourselves. Rameau, you are an impertinent. I know I am, and it is on that condition that I was received here. You are a scoundrel. Like anybody else. A beggar. Should I be here, if I were not? I will have you turned out of doors. After dinner I will go of my own will. I recommend you to go. We dined, I did not lose a single toothful. After eating well and drinking amply, for after all Messer Gaster is a person with whom I have never sulked, I made up my mind what to do, and I prepared to go. I had pledged my word in presence of so many people that I was bound to keep it. For a considerable time I hunted up and down the room for my hat and cane in every corner where they were not likely to be, reckoning all the time that the master of the house would break out into a new torrent of injuries, that somebody would interpose, and that we should at last make friends by sheer dint of altercation. I turned on this side and that, for I had nothing on my heart, but the master, more sombre and dark-browed than Homer's Apollo as he lets his arrows fly among the Greeks, with his cap plucked farther over his head than usual, marched backwards and forwards up and down the room. Mademoiselle approaches me, but, Mademoiselle, say I, what has happened beyond what happens every day? Have I been different from what I am on other days? I insist on his leaving the house. I am leaving. But I have given no ground of offense. Pardon me, we invite the abbé and... It was he who was wrong to invite the abbé, while at the same time he was receiving me, and with me so many other creatures of my sort. Come, friend Rameau, you must beg the abbé's pardon. I shall not know what to do with his pardon. Come, come, all will be right. They take me by the hand, and drag me towards the abbé's chair. I look at him with a kind of admiring wonder, for who before ever asked pardon of the abbé? All this is very absurd, abbé, confess, is it not? And then I laugh, and the abbé laughs too. So that is my forgiveness on that side, but I had next to approach the other, and that was a very different thing. I forget exactly how it was that I framed my apology. Sir, here is the madman. He has made me suffer too long, I wish to hear no more about him. He is sorry. Yes, I am very sorry. It shall not happen again. Until the first rascal. I do not know whether he was in one of those days of ill humor when Mademoiselle herself dreads to go near him, or whether he misunderstood what I said, or whether I said something wrong. Things were worse than before. Good heavens, does he not know me? Does he not know that I am like children, and that there are some circumstances in which I let anything and everything escape me? And then, God help me, am I not to have a moment of relief? Why, it would wear out a puppet made of steel, to keep pulling the string from night to morning, and from morning to night. I must amuse them, of course, that is the condition. But I must now and then amuse myself. In the midst of these distractions there came into my head a fatal idea, an idea that gave me confidence, that inspired me with pride and insolence. It was that they could not do without me, and that I was indispensable. Yes, I dare say that you are very useful to them, but that they are still more useful to you. You will not find as good a house every day, but they, for one madman who falls short, will find 100 to take his place. 100 madmen like me, Sir Philosopher, they are not so common, I can tell you. Flat fools, yes. People are harder to please in folly than in talent or virtue. I am a rarity in my own kind, a great rarity. Now that they have me no longer, what are they doing? They find time as heavy as if they were dogs. I am an inexhaustible bag full of impertinences. Every minute I had some fantastic notion that made them laugh till they cried. I was a whole bedlam in myself. Well, at any rate you had bed and board, coat and breeches, shoes, and a pistole a month. That is the profit side of the account, you say not a word of the cost of it all. First, if there was a whisper of a new piece, no matter how bad the weather, one had to ransack all the garrets in Paris, until one had found the author, then to get a reading of the play, and adroitly to insinuate that there was a part in it which would be rendered in a superior manner by a certain person of my acquaintance. And by whom, if you please? By whom? A pretty question. There are graces, finesse, elegance. Ah, you mean Mademoiselle d'Angeville. Perhaps you know her. Yes, a little, but 'tis not she. Who is it, then? I whispered the name very low. She. Yes, she, I repeated with some shame, for sometimes I do feel a touch of shame, and at this name you should have seen how long the poet's face grew, if indeed he did not burst out laughing in my face. Still, whether he would or not, I was bound to take my man to dine, and he, being naturally afraid of pledging himself, drew back, and tried to say no, thank you. You should have seen how I was treated, if I did not succeed in my negotiation. I was a blockhead, a fool, a rascal, I was not good for a single thing, I was not worth the glass of water which they gave me to drink. It was still worse at their performance, when I had to go intrepidly amid the cries of a public that has a good judgment of its own, whatever may be said about it, and make my solitary clap of the hand audible, draw every eye to me, and sometimes save the actress from hisses, and hear people murmur around me, he is one of the valets in disguise belonging to the man who. Will that knave be quiet? They do not know what brings a man to that, they think it is stupidity, but there is one motive that excuses anything. Even the infraction of the civil laws. At length, however, I became known, and people used to say, oh, it is Rameau. My resource was to throw out some words of irony to save my solitary applause from ridicule, by making them interpret it in an opposite sense. Now agree that one must have a mighty interest to make one thus brave the assembled public, and that each of these pieces of hard labor was worth more than a paltry crown. And then at home there was a pack of dogs to tend, and cats for which I was responsible. I was only too happy if Miku favored me with a stroke of his claw that tore my cuff or my wrist. Croquette is liable to colic, 'tis I who have to rub her. In old days Mademoiselle used to have the vapors, today, it is her nerves. She is beginning to grow a little stout, you should hear the fine tales they make out of this. You do not belong to people of this sort, at any rate. Why not? Because it is indecent to throw ridicule on one's benefactors. But is it not worse still to take advantage of one's benefits to degrade the receiver of them? But if the receiver of them were not vile in himself, nothing would give the benefactor the chance. But if the personages were not ridiculous in themselves they would not make subjects for good tales. And then, is it my fault if they mix with rascaldom? Is it my fault if, after mixing themselves up with rascaldom, they are betrayed and made fools of. When people resolve to live with people like us, if they have common sense, there is an infinite quantity of blackness for which they must make up their minds. When they take us, do they not know us for what we are, for the most interested, vile, and perfidious of souls? Then if they know us, all is well. There is a tacit compact that they shall treat us well, and that sooner or later we shall treat them ill in return for the good that they have done us. Does not such an agreement subsist between a man and his monkey or his parrot? If you take a young provincial to the menagerie at Versailles, and he takes it into his head for a freak to push his hands between the bars of the cage of the tiger or the panther, whose fault is it? It is all written in the silent compact, and so much the worse for the man who forgets or ignores it. How I could justify by this universal and sacred compact the people whom you accuse of wickedness, whereas it is in truth yourselves whom you ought to accuse of folly. But while we execute the just decrees of Providence on folly, you who paint us as we are, you execute its just decrees on us. What would you think of us, if we claimed, with our shameless manners, to enjoy public consideration? That we are out of our senses. And those who look for decent behavior from people who are born vicious and with vile and bad characters, are they in their senses? Everything has its true wages in this world. There are two public prosecutors, one at your door, chastising offenses against society, nature is the other. Nature knows all the vices that escape the laws. Give yourself up to debauchery, and you will end with dropsy. If you are crapulous, your lungs will find you out. If you open your door to ragamuffins, and live in their company, you will be betrayed, laughed at, despised. The shortest way is to resign oneself to the equity of these judgments, and to say to oneself, that is as it should be, to shake one's ears and turn over a new leaf, or else to remain what one is, but on the conditions aforesaid. You cannot doubt what judgment I pass on such a character as yours. Not at all. I am in your eyes an abject and most despicable creature, and I am sometimes the same in my own eyes, though not often. I more frequently congratulate myself on my vices than blame myself for them. You are more constant in your contempt. True, but why show me all your turpitude? First, because you already know a good deal of it, and I saw that there was more to gain than to lose, by confessing the rest. How so, if you please? It is important in some lines of business to reach sublimity, it is especially so in evil. People spit upon a small rogue, but they cannot refuse a kind of consideration to a great criminal. His courage amazes you, his atrocity makes you shudder. In all things, what people prize is unity of character. But this estimable unity of character you have not quite got. I find you from time to time vacillating in your principles. It is uncertain whether you get your wickedness from nature or study, and whether study has brought you as far as possible. I agree with you, but I have done my best. Have I not had the modesty to recognize persons more perfect in my own line than myself? Have I not spoken to you of Bae with the deepest admiration? Bae is the first person in the world for me. But after Bae you come. No Pelicet, then. Pelicet, but not Pelicet alone. And who is worthy to share the second rank with him? The renegade of Avignon. I never heard of the renegade of Avignon, but he must be an astonishing man. He is so, indeed. The history of great personages has always interested me. I can well believe it. This hero lived in the house of a good and worthy descendant of Abraham, promised to the father of the faithful in number equal to the stars in the heavens. In the house of a Jew. In the house of a Jew. He had at first surprised pity, then goodwill, then entire confidence, for that is how it always happens. We count so strongly on our kindness, that we seldom hide our secrets from anybody on whom we have heaped benefits. How should there not be ingrates in the world, when we expose this man to the temptation of being ungrateful with impunity? That is a just reflection which our Jew failed to make. He confided to the renegade that he could not conscientiously eat pork. You will see the advantage that a fertile wit knew how to get from such a confession. Some months passed, during which our renegade redoubled his attentions, when he believed his Jew thoroughly touched, thoroughly captivated, thoroughly convinced that he had no better friend among all the tribes of Israel. Now admire the circumspection of the man. He is in no hurry, he lets the pear ripen before he shakes the branch. Too much haste might have ruined his design. It is because greatness of character usually results from the natural balance between several opposite qualities. Pray leave your reflections, and go straight on with your story. That is impossible. There are days when I cannot help reflecting, 'tis a malady that must be allowed to run its course. Where was I? At the intimacy that had been established between the Jew and the renegade. Then the pear was ripe. But you are not listening, what are you dreaming about? I am thinking of the curious inequality in your tone, now so high, now so low. How can a man made of vices be one and the same? He reaches his friend's house one night, with an air of violent perturbation, with broken accents, a face as pale as death, and trembling in every limb. What is the matter with you? We are ruined. Ruined, how? Ruined, I tell you, beyond all help. Explain. One moment, until I have recovered from my fright. Come, then, recover yourself, says the Jew. A traitor has informed against us before the Holy Inquisition, you as a Jew, me as a renegade, an infamous renegade. Mark how the traitor does not blush to use the most odious expressions. It needs more courage than you may suppose to call oneself by one's right name. You do not know what an effort it costs to come to that. No, I dare say not. But the infamous renegade, he is false, but his falsity is adroit enough. The Jew takes fright, tears his beard, rolls on the ground, sees the officers at his door, sees himself clad in the sanbenito, sees his auto the fe all made ready. My friend, he cries, my good, tender friend, my only friend, what is to be done? What is to be done? Why show ourselves, affect the greatest security, go about our business just as we usually do? The procedure of the tribunal is secret but slow. We must take advantage of its delays to sell all you have. I will hire a boat, or I will have it hired by a third person. That will be best. In it we will deposit your fortune, for it is your fortune that they are most anxious to get at, and then we will go, you and I, and seek under another sky the freedom of serving our God, and following in security the law of Abraham and our own consciences. The important point in our present dangerous situation is to do nothing imprudent. No sooner said than done. The vessel is hired, victualled, and manned, the Jew's fortune put on board. On the morrow, at dawn, they are to sail. They are free to sup gaily and to sleep in all security. On the morrow they escape their prosecutors. In the night, the renegade gets up, despoils the Jew of his portfolio, his purse, his jewels, goes on board, and sails away. And you think that this is all? Good, you are not awake to it. Now when they told me the story, I divined at once what I have not told you, in order to try your sagacity. You were quite right to be an honest man, you would never have made more than a fifth-rate scoundrel. Up to this point the renegade is only that, he is a contemptible rascal whom nobody would consent to resemble. The sublimity of his wickedness is this, that he was himself the informer against his good friend the Israelite, of whom the Inquisition took hold when he awoke the next morning, and of whom a few days later they made a famous bonfire. And it was in this way that the renegade became the tranquil possessor of the fortune of the accursed descendant of those who crucified our Lord. I do not know which of the two is most horrible to me, the vileness of your renegade, or the tone in which you speak of it. And that is what I said, the atrocity of the action carries you beyond contempt, and hence my sincerity. I wished you to know to what a degree I excelled in my art, to extort from you the admission that I was at least original in my abasement, to rank me in your mind on the line of the great good foreknowts, and to hail me henceforth, vivat Mascarilus, forbem imperator. Here the discussion is turned aside, by Rameau's pantomimic performance of a fugue, to various topics in music. 224. How does it happen that with such fine tact, such great sensibility for the beauties of the musical art, you are so blind to the fine things of morality, so insensible to the charms of virtue? It must be because there is for the one a sense that I have not got, a fibre that has not been given to me, a slack string that you may play upon as much as you please, but it never vibrates. Or it may be because I have always lived with those who were good musicians but bad men, whence it has come to pass that my ear has grown very fine, and my heart has grown very deaf. and then there is something in race. The blood of my father and the blood of my uncle is the same blood. My blood is the same as that of my father. The paternal molecule was hard and obtuse, and that accursed first molecule has assimilated to itself all the rest. Do you love your child? Do I love it, the little savage? I dote on it. Will you not then seriously set to work to arrest in it the consequences of the accursed paternal molecule? I shall labor in vain, I fancy. If he is destined to grow into a good man, I shall not hurt him, but if the molecule meant him for a ne'er-do-well like his father, then all the pains that I might have taken to make a decent man of him would only be very hurtful to him. Education incessantly crossing the inclination of the molecule, he would be drawn as it were by two contrary forces, and would walk in zigzags along the path of life, as I see an infinity of other people doing, equally awkward in good and evil. These are what we call auspices, of all epithets the most to be dreaded, because it marks mediocrity and the very lowest degree of contempt. A great scoundrel is a great scoundrel, but he is not an auspice. Before the paternal molecule had got the upper hand, and had brought him to the perfect abjection at which I have arrived, it would take endless time, and he would lose his best years. I do not meddle at present, I let him come on. I examine him, he is already greedy, cunning, idle, lying, and a cheat. I'm much afraid that he is a chip of the old block. And you will make him a musician, so that the likeness may be exact. A musician. Sometimes I look at him and grind my teeth, saying, if thou wert ever to know a note of music, I believe I would wring thy neck. And why so, if you please? Music leads to nothing. It leads to everything. Yes, when people are first-rate. But who can promise himself that his child shall be first-rate? The odds are 10,000 to 1 that he will never be anything but a wretched scraper of catgut. Are you aware that it would perhaps be easier to find a child fit to govern a realm, fit to be a great king, than one fit for a great violin player? It seems to me that agreeable talents, even if they are mediocre, among a people who are without morals, and are lost in debauchery and luxury, get a man rapidly on in the path of fortune. No doubt, gold and gold, gold is everything, and all the rest without gold is nothing. So instead of cramming his head with fine maxims which he would have to forget, on pain of remaining a beggar all the days of his life, what I do is this: when I have a louis, which does not happen to me often, I plant myself in front of him, I pull the louis out of my pocket, I show it to him with signs of admiration, I raise my eyes to heaven, I kiss the louis before him, and to make him understand still better the importance of the sacred coin, I point to him with my finger all that he can get with it, a fine frock, a pretty cap, a rich cake. Then I thrust the louis into my pocket, I walk proudly up and down, I raise the lappet of my waistcoat, I strike my fob, and in that way I make him see that it is the louis in it that gives me all this assurance. Nothing could be better. But suppose it were to come to pass that, being so profoundly penetrated by the value of the louis, he were one day. I understand you. One must close one's eyes to that. There is no moral principle without its own inconvenience. At the worst tease a bad quarter of an hour, and then all is over. Even after hearing views so wise and so bold, I persist in thinking that it would be good to make a musician of him. I know no other means of getting so rapidly near great people, of serving their vices better, or turning your own to more advantage. That is true, but I have plans for a speedier and surer success. If it were only a girl. But as we cannot do all that we should like, we must take what comes, and make the best of it, and not be such idiots as most fathers, who could literally do nothing worse, supposing them to have deliberately planned the misery of their children, namely, give the education of Lacedaemon to a child who is destined to live in Paris. If the education is bad, the morals of my country are to blame for that, not I. Answer for it who may. I wish my son to be happy, or what is the same thing, rich, honored, and powerful. I know something about the easiest ways of reaching this end, and I will teach them to him betimes. If you blame me, you sages, the multitude and success will acquit me. He will put money in his purse, I can tell you. If he has plenty of that, he will lack nothing else, not even your esteem and respect. You may be mistaken. Then perhaps he will do very well without it, like many other people. There was in all this a good deal of what passes through many people's minds, and much of the principle according to which they shape their own conduct, but they never talk about it. There, in short, is the most marked difference between my man and most of those about us. He avowed the vices that he had, and that others have, but he was no hypocrite. He was neither more nor less abominable than they. He was only more frank, and more consistent, and sometimes he was profound in the midst of his depravity. I trembled to think what his child might become under such a master. It is certain that after ideas of bringing up, so strictly traced on the pattern of our manners, he must go far, unless prematurely stopped on the road. Fear nothing. The important point, the difficult point, to which a good father ought to attend before everything else, is not to give to his child vices that enrich, or comical tricks such as make him valuable to people of quality. All the world does that, if not on system as I do, at least by example and precept. The important thing is to impress on him the just proportion, the art of keeping out of disgrace and the arm of the law. There are certain discords in the social harmony that you must know exactly how to place, to prepare, and to hold. Nothing so tame as a succession of perfect chords. There needs something that stimulates, that resolves the beam, and scatters its rays. Quite so. By your image you bring me back from morals to music, and I am very glad, for, to be quite frank with you, I like you better as musician than as moralist. Yet, I am a mere subaltern in music, and a really superior figure in morals. I doubt that, but even if it were so, I am an honest man, and your principles are not mine. So much the worse for you. Ah, if I only had your talents. I never mind my talents, let us return to yours. If I could only express myself like you. But I have an infernally absurd jargon, half the language of men of the world and of letters, half of Billingsgate. Nay, I am a poor talker enough. I only know how to speak the truth, and that does not always answer, as you know. But it is not for speaking the truth, on the contrary, it is for skillful lying that I covet your gift. If I knew how to write, to cook up a book, to turn a dedicatory epistle, to intoxicate a fool as to his own merits, to insinuate myself into the good graces of women. And you do know all that 1,000 times better than I. I should not be worthy to be so much as your pupil. How many great qualities lost, of which you do not know the price. I get the price that I ask. If that were true, you would not be wearing that common suit, that rough waistcoat, those worsted stockings, those thick shoes, that ancient wig. I grant that. A man must be very maladroit not to be rich, if he sticks at nothing in order to become rich. But the odd thing is that there are people like me who do not look on riches as the most precious thing in the world. Bizarre people, you know. Bizarre enough. A man is not born with such a twist as that. He takes the trouble to give it to himself, for it is not in nature. In the nature of man. No, for everything that lives, without exception, seeks its own well-being at the expense of any prey that is proper to its purpose, and I am perfectly sure that if I let my little savage grow up without saying a word to him on the matter, he would wish to be richly clad, sumptuously fed, cherished by men, loved by women, and to heap upon himself all the happiness of life. If your little savage were left to himself, let him only preserve all his imbecility, and add to the scanty reason of the child in the cradle the violent passions of a man of 30, why he would strangle his father and dishonor his own mother. That proves the necessity of a good education, and who denies it? And what is a good education but one that leads to all sorts of enjoyments without danger and without inconvenience? I am not so far from your opinion, only let us keep clear of explanations. Why? Because I am afraid that we only agree in appearance, and that if we once begin to discuss what are the dangers and the inconveniences to avoid, we should cease to understand one another. What of that? Let us leave all this. I tell you, what I know about it I shall never get you to learn, and you will more easily teach me what I do not know, and you do know, in music. Let us talk about music, dear Amo, and tell me how it has come about that with the faculty for feeling, retaining, and rendering the finest passages in the great masters, with the enthusiasm that they inspire in you, and that you transmit to others, you have done nothing that is worth Instead of answering me, he shrugged his shoulders, and pointing to the sky with his finger, he cried, "The star! The star!" When nature made Leo, Vinci, Purgoles, Dunny, she smiled. She put on a grave and imposing air in shaping my dear Uncle Rameau, who for 60 years they will have called the great Rameau, and of whom very soon nobody will say a word. When she tricked up his nephew, she made a grimace, and again a grimace. And as he said this, he put on all sorts of odd expressions, contempt, disdain, irony, and he seemed to be kneading between his fingers a piece of paste, and to be smiling at the ridiculous shapes that he gave it. That done, he flung the incongruous pagode, 225, away from him, and said happy smiley it was thus she made me, and flung me by the side of the other pagods, some with huge wrinkled paunches, and short necks, and great eyes projecting out of their heads, stamped with apoplexy, others with wry necks, some again with wizened faces, keen eyes, hooked noses. All were ready to split with laughing when they espied me, and I put my hands to my sides and split with laughter when I espied them, for fools and madmen tickle one another, they seek and attract one another. If when I got among them, I had not found ready-made the proverb about the money of fools being the patrimony of people with wits, they would have been indebted to me for it. I felt that nature had put my lawful inheritance into the purses of the pagods, and I devised 1,000 means of recovering my rights. Yes, I know all about your 1,000 means, you have told me of them, and I have admired them vastly. But with so many resources, why not have tried that of a fine work? When I am alone I take up my pen and intend to write, I bite my nails and rub my brow, your humble servant, goodbye, the god is absent. I had convinced myself that I had genius, at the end of the time I discover that I am a fool, and nothing but a fool. But how is one to feel, to think, to rise to heights, to paint in strong colors, while haunting with such creatures as those whom one must see if one is to live, in the midst of such talk as one has to make and to hear, and such idle gossip? How charming the boulevard was today! Have you heard the little marmot? Her playing is ravishing. Mr. So-and-so had the handsomest pair of greys in his carriage that you can possibly imagine. The beautiful Mrs. So-and-so is beginning to fade, who at the age of 45 would wear a headdress like that. Young such and such is covered with diamonds, and she gets them cheap. You mean she gets them dear? No, I do not. Where did you see her? At the play. The scene of despair was played as it had never been played before. The Polichinelle of the fair has a voice, but no delicacy, no soul. Madame So-and-so has produced 2 at a birth, each father will have his own child. And yet you suppose that this kind of thing, said and said again, and listened to every day of the week, sets the soul aglow and leads to mighty things. Nay, it were better to turn the key of one's garret, drink cold water, eat dry bread, and seek one's true self. Maybe, but I have not the courage. And then the idea of sacrificing one's happiness for the sake of a success that is doubtful. And the name that I bear. Rameau. It is not with talents as it is with nobility. Nobility transmits itself, and increases in luster by passing from grandfather to father, and from father to son, and from son to grandson, without the ancestor impressing a spark of merit on his descendant. The old stock ramifies into an enormous crop of fools, but what matter? It is not so with talents. Merely to obtain the renown of your father, you must be cleverer than he was, you must have inherited his fiber. The fiber has failed me, but the wrist is nimble, the fiddle bow scrapes away, and the pot boils. If there is not glory, there is broth. If I were in your place, I would not take it for granted, I would try. Whatever it be that a man applies himself to, nature meant him for it. She makes mighty blunders. For my part, I do not look down from heights, whence all seems confused and blurred. The man who prunes a tree with his knife, all one with the caterpillar who devours its leaf, a couple of insects, each at his proper task. Do you, if you choose, perch yourself on the epicycle of the planet Mercury, and thence distribute creation, in imitation of Reaumur, the classes of flies into seamstresses, surveyors, reapers, you, the human species into joiners, dancers, singers, tilers. That is your affair, and I will not meddle with it. I am in this world, and in this world I rest. But if it is in nature to have an appetite, for it is always to appetite that I come back, and to the sensation that is ever present to me, then I find that it is by no means consistent with good order not to have always something to eat. What a precious economy of things! Men who are overcrammed with everything under the sun, while others, who have a stomach just as importunate as they, a hunger that recurs as regularly as theirs, have not a bite. The worst is the constrained posture to which want pins us down. The needy man does not walk like anybody else, he jumps, he crawls, he wriggles, he limps, he passes his whole life in taking and executing artificial postures. What are postures? Ask Novura. 226. The world offers far more of them than his art can imitate. There are you two, to use your expression or montins, perched on the epicycle of Mercury, and eyeing the various pantomimes of the human race. No, I tell you, I'm too heavy to raise myself so high. No sojourn in the fogs for me. I look about me, and I assume my postures, or I amuse myself with the postures that I see others taking. I am an excellent pantomime, as you shall judge. Then he set himself to smile, to imitate the admirer, the suppliant, the fawning complaisant. He expects a command, receives it, starts off like an arrow, returns, the order is executed, he reports what he has done, he is attentive to everything, he picks up something that has fallen, he places a pillow or a footstool, he holds a saucer, he brings a chair, opens a door, closes a window, draws the curtains, gazes on the master and mistress. he stands immovable, his arms hanging by his side, his legs exactly straight. He listens, he seeks to read their faces, and then he adds, "That is my pantomime, very much the same as that of all flatterers, courtiers, valets, and beggars." The buffooneries of this man, the stories of the Abigailiani, the extravagances of Rabelais, have sometimes thrown me into profound reveries. They are three stores whence I have provided myself with ridiculous masks that I place on the faces of the gravest personages, and I see Pantaloon in a prelate, a satyr in a president, a pig in a monk, an ostrich in a minister, a goose in his first clerk. But according to your account, I said to my man, there are plenty of beggars in the world, and yet I know nobody who is not acquainted with some of the steps of your dance. You are right. In a whole kingdom there is only one man who walks, and that is the sovereign. The sovereign. There is something to be said on that. For do you suppose that one may not from time to time find even by the side of him, a dainty foot, a pretty neck, a bewitching nose, that makes him execute his pantomime? Whoever has need of another is indigent, and assumes a posture. The king postures before his mistress, and before God he treads his pantomimic measure. The minister dances the step of courtier, flatterer, valet, and beggar before his king. The crowd of the ambitious cut 100 capers, each viler than the rest, before the minister. The abbé, with his bands and long cloak, postures at least once a week before the patron of livings. On my word, what you call the pantomime of beggars is only the whole huge bustle of the earth. But let us bethink ourselves what o'clock it is, for I must go to the opera. What is going on? Dorfans trochures. There are some tolerable things in the music. The only pity is that he has not been the first to say them. Among those dead, there are always some to dismay the living. What would you have? Quisque suos patimer manes. But it is 5:30, I hear the bell ringing my vespers. Good day, my philosopher, always the same, am I not? Alas, you are, worse luck. Only let me have that bad luck for 40 years to come. Who laughs last has the best of the laugh. The End. Printed by R&R Clark, Limited, Edinburgh. Footnotes 1, Ov. v 289. 2. v 295, 296. 3. Ov. v 342. 4. Boethius. 5. See, however, above, volume IP 274. 6. Ov. 2. 249. 7. See Nordhof's Communistic Societies of the United States, London, Murray, 1875, pp. 259 to 293. This grave and most instructive book shows how modifiable are some of those facts of existing human character which are vulgarly deemed to be ultimate and ineradicable. 8. Ov. 2. 243, 9, Hetner's Literaturgeschichte, I 462. 10. The Illagda Richardson is in Diderot's works, v 212–227. 11. The Belle Aimée was the origin of the scone seal that has played such a part in German literature and life. The reader will find a history of the expression in an appendix to Dr. Erich Schmidt's study. Richardson, Rousseau, und Goethe, Jena, 1875. 12. La Religieuse. Ove, v 110. 13. Sterne's Letters, the 23rd of May, 1765. 14. The 12th of November, 1767. 15. For example, Le Voyage Sentimental of Vernes, Grimm, Cor. Lit. 13. 227, 16, quoted in Rosencrantz, 2. 326, 17, 6. 221, 222. 18. Essays, 4. 303, ed. 1869. 19. For example, Wortlet's poem, Sur l'art de peindre, 1760, Le Mire sur la peinture, 1769, Mars's Picture Carmen, 1736. See Diderot's works, 13. 17, etc., 20, Ov. 3. 486 Gurauer, 2. 15. Also Blumner's admirable edition of the Laocoon, p. 173. 21, 13. 33, 22, Grimm, Cor. Lit. 4. 136. In another place in the same work either Grimm or Diderot makes a remark about Bateau, which is worth remembering in our own age of official vindications of Oxy.